Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the RubberGum Anime Podcast, where my friend August here is the rubber and I am the gum. And it just occurred to me that we've picked that title, which is a great title, but it hasn't been applicable yet because we've really agreed on everything so far.
Yeah,
Isn't that weird?
that that is weird.
Huh.
I
Well,
I think it's
we'll get there eventually,
we
considering how often our music opinions clash.
yeah, but yeah, this is the show where we talk about anime.
And today we have a very exciting episode for you. We are going to finally be talking about Fate after beating around the bush for 37 years, talking about that show and alluding to it. And we're going to be covering it in every capacity we can. And this will be the official start of that. We're talking about Fate Stay Night Heaven's Feel. Heaven's Feel being one of the core three routes of the original Fate Stay Night. We'll go into that a little bit later when we actually discuss that. But it is one of the storylines in the Fate franchise. It came out over the course of the past couple of years, animated by Studio Ufotable, and the last one came out end of last year. Early this year in America, kind of, sort of, blah. But we're gonna be
Uh,
talking about those three movies. Actually, August, I have something relevant that we can talk about that I forgot about
oh,
initially. And it has to do with the fact that we had actually recorded us doing something, and I attempted to upload this recording, but couldn't get it edited around the copyright. And I'm going to try and do
mm,
that eventually for one day. But in terms of what we have been
oh
watching since
yeah.
the previous recorded episodes,
Uh,
we had actually attempted to watch a Fate show because we were just looking at things to the night we started watching Death Note, we were just looking for things to watch just to I don't know, we wanted to A, cleanse our palate, and B, just get something interesting to talk about. And we found out there was a Fate show on Netflix that neither one of us have ever
no,
heard of. And then we also noticed, this is Studio Shaft? Akiyuki Shinbo's studio?
of
What?
course, as with everything Shaft produces, Shinbo directed. So this
And it's
that
Fate
premise.
Extra Last
Yeah,
Encore.
that premise alone had us enticed. We were like, okay, we're sitting through at least one episode of this, and at least one episode we did sit through.
It was. I hope I can get it so I can upload it and so people can understand what we saw. But it is indisputably the worst introductory episode to any series I've ever seen in my life. Like,
It
head and shoulders.
it
Can't
was
think of
so
a
bad.
worse first episode. It was
Yeah.
nonsense, and the character designs were ugly as shit. Like Fate, the one good thing this series is going for it is those original character designs, and it managed to fuck all of those up too. You got Yuji Everlead as your main dude, and then it has fucking Sakura and Rin, and they both
Who
look
who
like they
both
were
look
drawn
awful.
in the style of K-On, not K-On, Lucky Star. And
Lucky,
it's just, it
yeah.
looks awful, looks bad, fucking Lucky
Uh,
Star ass hair.
and then we've got Saber's design, which they managed to ruin somehow. And
Again,
I I should mention we by the end of the episode figured out what was going on. I think, but only
partially.
partially, but only by way of experience with other Fate entries. So if this was the
Yeah.
first thing you saw,
And I played the game that this is like, it's supposedly based off of a game, but we even read ahead of time that Nasu was just like, I don't want there to be like a linear way to experience this. Like, you can either watch this first, play the game first, or like whatever. So we were like, okay, you said so, so we're gonna go in and do this. And as somebody who played that game, I had no fucking idea what was happening. It was just like stream of consciousness scenes blending together, and like a kid plays chess and he dies because
oh
he
my
didn't win,
gosh.
and then there's just so much bullshit in it. And then at the end we were like, oh, okay, they're all in a simulation on the moon.
What the fuck?
Like, that's not an exaggeration, they're all in a
That's
simulation on the
that's what
moon.
happens, and it's real. It's not a joke. This is the reality.
And it was followed up by, we couldn't take that. So I think we just wanted to see if Fate Apocrypha, which I have gone into detail occasionally saying that that's one of the worst anime I've ever completed.
And we
uh,
will cover that in full. Don't you
Uh-huh.
worry.
We wanted to watch the first episode to be like, which of these two awful shows has the worst first episode? And honestly, I'm with a coin toss as to both of them. Is that like the fucking Shaft, the first
I
one, was just so insane. I was like laughing and screaming the entire time.
yeah,
And then Fate Apocrypha is like, you know exactly what's happening, like everything, it like makes sense mostly. It's just the most boring thing you've ever seen in your life. So it's like, which type of infuriating do you
and
prefer? And it's like,
that's why I would say the Fate Encore one was worse, but also better because it was a
mhm,
special kind of bad. That's not the
yes.
dollar store bad you find. It's like Neil Breen type shit.
Oh my god, it really was in that first half. Like, I mean, it was some twisted pair shit. Oh man, it was so fucking ugly too. And that, I mean, Fate Apocrypha was also ugly, but I think the one good thing that came from Fate Apocrypha was there was like a cult in Fate
Oh my
Apocrypha
god.
called the Yigga Millennia,
You're gonna millennia.
which I have thought about at least once every day since we
Oh
watched
my
it, and
god.
I giggled like a fucking schoolgirl.
It's so goofy. It's
So
so good.
we watched that, and we're starting to watch Death Note because we want to cover it. But August actually has something for the introductory segment.
So what I've been watching is because, and to give away the lead, we're planning a Death Note episode. We plan episodes and everything. I watched the first season and about the first half of the second season of a similarly Tetsuro Araki directed show, Attack on Titan, which I know Jake and I discussed beforehand that we've actually seen about the same amount of the show by random coincidence.
Yeah, it was a long time ago because it was a little bit after the show first came out, but it's so easy to forget that when Attack on Titan came out, that first season, that show owned the fucking universe. You could not
I,
go 10 feet without seeing some shit with
I,
Attack on Titan
I
in it.
want to attest to 11-year-old me couldn't go 10 feet without seeing Attack on Titan stuff on YouTube. I was young enough
Mhm.
where I can still vividly remember Attack on Titan AMVs on like 2013-14 YouTube. So
Oh
that's
god,
just
the Linkin Park AMVs.
yeah,
Mwah, what an era.
that's just the cultural saturation the show had and I guess still has in a sense to some
To an
degree.
extent, because I mean the ending of it happened recently, and
It
it
was
was the
trending
first
on
time
Twitter.
in years I had heard someone talk about it.
It was trending on Twitter. Yeah.
Apparently, for bad reasons, neither of
Neither of us
yeah,
spoiled
we don't know why, but
ourselves.
we'll eventually figure it out.
Yeah, but so
Mm-mm.
I
I don't think I even got
yeah.
far enough into the show to know what the spoilers even were.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
So, what did you think of it? Because you've seen it more recently than I
uh
have.
I must say it has problems. It has some really glaring story problems where it's like, why the hell didn't you do that? That was the stupidest scene ever. But it also highlights to me
Full
why
bit.
Tetsuro Araki is so good of a director because he is
Oh yeah.
able to set up a scene in such a way that like there was a dramatic reveal in like episode 7 of season 2 where it was like it was
Mhm.
literally so good I thought about it every day since I saw that episode because it was such a powerful and clever way to disclose a piece of information that's like earth-shattering to the characters, but it's just done in this like offhand way where it's like quite literally blink and you miss it, and that was such a powerful way to convey that piece of information. I was really astounded by it. And yeah, I'd say as a whole, it's actually managed to string me along throughout it, so much to the point where because it was cheap,
Oh, here we
I
go.
actually went and grabbed
Ah,
this at a local video store to get through the second season of this show.
that's a show that'll benefit from HD a lot, just because the thing
Yeah,
I remember them. I mean, obviously, the thing that stands out in my memory is the fight scenes and the way they're directed. Like, it's not just a show that like a lot of shonen, very popular anime have this thing where they're like, you know, they're very smart battles, but they consist of like generally the same components, I think. But Attack on Titan is different because it's like it's the way that those fight scenes are choreographed and animated absolutely sumptuous. Like I have never seen such stylistic verve and flair that's that like obviously expensive to make, and a sign of someone with real talent of how to make those scenes work, like the
Oh yeah.
geography and the weight to all of it. I just remember being like super impactful and cool.
That's what's astounding about it, that it's able to string that all together. And I guess maybe my biggest problem, at least for the early part, is I feel, and this is more true of the first season because I think, or at least like the first half of the first season, because as it went along, this is something that's gotten better and better for me. Is that I thought a lot of the initial character development was a little rushed, and I think that's also just something that's more indicative of my tastes, where I'm huge on like characters and developing your people. And the show early on does kind of, you get 2 episodes with like 17 people, and then
And then
by like,
half of them are dead by
and
the
then
end of the
half of them
show.
are dead by like the end of episode 13, and you're like, well, I kind of wish I knew those people better.
Like I get that you're trying to emphasize the like suddenness of death, but also it comes at a sacrifice, because I think that's the reason I stopped watching too. It wasn't necessarily because I thought it
Hmm.
was bad. I thought I enjoyed myself pretty much the whole way through. It was just more of a sense of like, I just feel like my sensibilities maybe aren't as in line with this as most people are, just because like I loved, like, the action scenes are great, but
Yeah.
the stuff that I really really loved was the very quiet intimate character stuff of like everything after that first initial battle and when everyone's like dealing with it.
Yeah,
That shit's awesome.
that's
That's
awesome. I
love that.
love that.
Yeah.
I found the second season, there was like a whole arc of the second season that really focused on there were a whole couple of episodes that really focused on characters dealing with the fact that they were going to die then and there.
Hmm.
And that's fascinating to me. I love that stuff. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I think it's an enjoyable show. I guess I'm not up to the level where some people are, where I'm like 10 out of 10, this is the best fucking thing ever, but maybe it gets there. I haven't seen it.
I've heard that it transforms throughout its progression narratively into like a few different kinds of shows. Like I hear at least, and the impression that I got from season two was that it was definitely a lot different than season one, just because it was like the scale of everything was completely like it wasn't bigger or smaller, it was just different. And then when season three came out, that was when I heard peakings of people being like, yo, this show is fucking good now. And I'm like, okay, cool, but like it's been a while, so I don't really feel incentivized to
Yeah,
catch up yet.
and I
But
think
now
this
I kind of do.
and I think you make a good point there, because that's kind of where I think the show, and this isn't impacting my experience because I'm starting the show in 2021, but there's like a 3-year gap between season like 1 and 2, which is a little absurd.
Mhm.
Just not in the sense that I don't get it. Animation is expensive and it takes time, but also viewer engagement steadily decreases with that amount of time.
It might be a case of like the viewership decreases because it's like the show changing isn't is like far from where it started as, and thus a lot of people that got on board with it maybe lost interest, whereas for me, like, it sounds theoretically from what I know about it like it progresses into the type of show that I would enjoy more, and that most people who like that first season as much as they do probably would get along with. So I have
Yeah.
no clue.
But no, I mean, yeah, we're obviously speaking for a only like the first third of the show, which is obviously not representative of the whole thing, but that's
Yeah.
kind of where I fall on it so far. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, Araki, he can direct the shit out of stuff. He
Yeah.
can he can do that. And August led off this particular discussion because he was the only one who's actually been watching anything.
Yeah.
I mean, other than I was obviously there for the Fate things, but it's like, again, life is hard, anime is long. What are you gonna
Yep.
do? So
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that takes us right into things. Um, well, Fate. Good God, where to fucking start? Like, I know we're covering the Heavens Feel movies, but it's like one does not simply just start watching Fate. It's something that, like, it's like a process. I still can't, in good conscience, tell, like, if you ask me, like, I'm not familiar with what this Fate shit is. Where do I start? My answer is Fate Zero. And the only reason my answer is Fate Zero is because literally every other thing that you could use to get into the show is a less inclined version of that. And I think Fate Zero is really unfriendly to the viewer. Like right
Oh
off the
yeah.
bat, it's got that exposition fucking
It's
episode that we
the
love, but it's
we
super
love
long.
because we love self-indulgence and maximalism and all that dog shit. But yeah, it's to your average flipping through the channel type of guy, it's not a
This requires dedication, and not even dedication that specifically rewards you, because as you can no doubt tell from August and my ramblings on this particular franchise in the past, we're not exactly a huge fan of all of it. And this is where I'm going to attempt to build from the ground up as to what this thing is, because I still feel like tons of people have probably watched Fate Zero and nothing else from that, which is kind of ideal, really. But
it is both
Fate,
ideal and a shame because you get the
yeah,
best part of it, but you also don't get a picture of what it is at all.
yeah, and the context for Fate Zero does elevate it slightly. It's just that, that context requires you wade through like 15 hours of uninteresting bullshit, and that's just one thing. Fate is weird because it started off as a spin-off of all things. Fate exists in this thing that is, I don't know if this is a colloquial term or an official term, but it exists in this thing called the Nasuverse, in reference to Kinaku Nazu, who initially came up with the concept of fate, but the original thing, I can't remember what the original series is even called, but it takes place in the same world and has the basic setup of this kind of like magical Harry Potter-ish world where, you know, there's like the magical school and you learn all the, you know, the special shonen anime boy. It's like a pretty typical thing. And then there's like all this world building in that show. And from some of that world building, we get Fate, which is just sort of like you get Fate Stay Night, which is the first
It
Fate
is
thing proper.
it's essentially an adult visual novel.
Yes.
Uh,
I will say it's not hentai, but it's not hentai. I don't really know how to
uh,
describe it.
there are sex scenes in that game.
Yeah. And you know, sure, that's part of the appeal for some. But the appeal of somebody at least who has read the visual novels, because I went through an entire Fate phase where I saw Zero and was like, oh my god, this is so cool. I need to consume all of it. And I read the visual novel, and it's honestly not a particularly compelling piece of fiction, frankly, just because of how aggressively overwritten it is. It might have just been the translation, to be honest, but it's a story that is, it thrives on details that it just explains endlessly. But there are parts of it that I really, really like because it does a great idea, or it does a great job of putting you in the main character's position, describing their struggle and just sort of conveying the sense of helplessness. And so basically, ground up here, Fate. In this universe, which I already described as being Harry Potter alike, I'll fucking Google what this actually comes from. But
Yeah,
the fucking Fate series is basically based around a concept in a world. The world in question being there's a secret society of magic people who keep themselves hidden from the normal world, and they, you know, it's like a part of, it's their own like subculture, and it's sort of like
Eh,
tied into the history of the world in a
and
way.
it's this secret society of like a very small amount of people. Like there's, I guess from everything I've seen of Fate, the number varies between like there's like between like 10 and 50 people in this secret society. It's this very niche part of society which virtually no one knows about.
Yeah, and it has a lot more in it. Just that we'll go over as we go through these shows. But the basic premise of it is that sort of like secret magical world, and in this magical world, there is Back to Future Diary, a death game. Death game in question being the eponymous Holy Grail War. And what this is is a competition where 7 mages, who I'm going to skip the details and semantics because that still doesn't make sense to me. This is how deep this goes. Is that me, the chronicler of all of this bullshit, still does not understand how everything works in it. But
Man who
7
has
mages
who
are chosen.
writes his own intricate book series full of its own complex nuances does not know what this is all about.
It's true. Um, I've read considerably. Oh man, that's depressing. Anywho, there's this competition where 7 mages are chosen because it's the holy grail, is not the holy grail that you're thinking of, as in the cup that Jesus Christ drank from. The holy grail in this universe is sort of like the idea of it. It's sort of like that in like a spiritual sense. And basically what it can do is, it's kind of an Indiana Jones situation. You get the grail if you win this death game called the Holy Grail War, and it will grant to you one wish, any one wish. So naturally, a lot of people highly motivated to get this grail because all of them are these very ambitious, aspirational, powerful people who all really want something or want to accomplish a specific goal. And they basically can summon a familiar to aid them in the Holy Grail War. And they all have a class. Like they're called servants, and there's like archer, lancer, saber, rider, caster, um, assassin, and berserker. I named them all. Fuck yeah. Um, there's all of those, and there's beyond that. You summon like a historical magical figure. I'm going to keep explaining while August is gone just because this will take a while. You can summon a figure from history that will abide by these classes. Case in point, you have the Saber class, which goes to uh, king slash queen, but King Arthur, who is a girl in this universe, King Arturia Pendragon. She fights in the Holy Grail War with her master. There's people like Alexander the Great. There's people like basically lots of very famous historical figure. People's like Bluebeard. They can exist both in myth and in reality. And so it really creates this interesting sort of coalescence of personalities, because the servants, they also have a desire. If they are granted the Holy Grail, they get a wish as well. So what this is that this is just a very simple. Once you lay the groundwork, all these 14 characters have to clash, fight each other, and kill each other to get the Holy Grail. And Fate Zero is sort of a prequel that I would almost describe Fate in a nutshell as like something that's basically public domain, but like because so many people have developed their own stories inside of this other than Nasu, that it's like it's just this hodgepodge at this point. Enter Gen Urobuchi, who is one of my favorite working directors in anime, did shows like Psycho Pass, comes along and is like, hey, this Fate Zero thing, I want to write and direct this. And he got Studio Ufotable, which is a studio that cranks out really, really, really high quality anime because they only take on one job at a time. They did the Garden of Sinners movies, which are really good,
Also,
which are also in the
interestingly,
same
yeah,
universe,
also a property by Nasu.
which is strange considering how outlandishly different that is to all of this. But that's a story for another time.
That's
But
yeah.
yeah, so you have Fate Zero comes onto the scene in 2011, and there was an anime of Fate Stay Night, an adaptation of the original visual novel that came out in the mid 2000s by Studio Dean, which was boring and bad, and we'll talk about that when we talk about it. But Fate Zero is sort of this. Well, it's a point zero. It's you sort of get the beforehand of everything that happens supposedly, and Fate Zero had its real moment of popularity when it came out because of its pedigree. It was kind of quashed in the moment because if real ones remember, that was also the year that a certain anime called Sword Art Online came out, and that pretty much dominated the anime landscape until something like Attack on Titan came and demolished it away. But people were into Fate Zero. And Fate Zero, August and I can both agree, is an incredibly compelling piece of work. Um, if you had to describe the appeal of Fate Zero, what do you think it would be?
Um, I'd say it almost has an appeal similar to like an HBO show or something like that, where particularly like a Game of Thrones or something, or like a lot of American prestige television, where it's watching this it's essentially watching a man break himself
Mhm.
without kind of spoiling anything about the show, but it is that's kind of where I've always categorized it in my head, although it also doesn't really appeal to people who would just go out and watch that kind of show because it's animated, it's got a lot of more high fantasy, or I guess it's low fantasy, but I don't fucking care.
An abundance of low fantasy that anyone would mistake for high fantasy. I think, you see King Arthur and it's just like, oh yeah, high fantasy. It's like
Yeah.
kind of. It's
Uh,
really closer to like urban fantasy, honestly. Like just with the
yeah.
landscapes and like the environments that are shown, especially in Unlimited Blade Wars.
And
But
also that most of the show is set in a real place, like
yep,
it's an actual city in
which I
Japan.
think we've talked about this in reference, and we've used Fate Zero as a point of comparison for many shows we've talked about thus far, mainly in reference to Future Diary and how we think a death game should be done. And the reason I find Fate Zero to be incredibly compelling is that for its first 13-ish episodes, that sort of first season of it is really, really great at not telling you who the main character is, or even really having a main character.
Yeah.
It devotes equal amounts of time to everyone. So right out of the gate, you're like, oh, okay, this is set up in a way where I don't know who's going to die because the narrative's not putting any more importance on one character more than the other. So if you go into this blind and don't know who survives, this is a really riveting watch because everyone here is written in such a way that they have a very, very distinct goal. And where Fate Zero succeeds, where other shows like it would fail, are that these goals are like, it doesn't matter how identifiable or human they are. The show will completely fucking squash you if it wants to. It is a dark, dark show. There's a character I think exemplified, and this won't be, I won't go into too much detail because we're not talking about Fate Zero right now,
Yeah.
but there's a character in Fate Zero who, like, it's sort of setting up all these people, and immediately he has the most selfless character motivation. He is easily the character with the most pathos, the one who you're just like, oh, this dude is like a good guy. And like, not all the people in the Holy Grail War are good people, makes that very clear, but like, this dude is different. And so it's just like, in any other show you would just kind of expect him to get his due. um to make a long story very short, he does not.
No.
It's really fucked. Like Fate Zero, ostensibly in that final half of the show, becomes a Shakespearean tragedy where everyone's core character flaws undo them, and
And
basically
that's
everyone
yeah.
who dies kind of does get a character arc fulfilled and find solace in death, and everyone who lives has to live with the consequences of what they've done.
And that's exactly where I draw the American prestige television comparison, in that
Yep.
that's the exact appeal, but of course, that audience would not find themselves consuming this show, which is not a knock against them because this is high barrier for entry.
I will say though, one of the things that I love about Gen Urobuchi and Studio Ufotable is that they definitely have a very Western sensibility when it comes to like directing. Is that like, there are just so many moments where you can imagine what's happening in live action very, very
Oh
easily.
yeah,
But they
yeah.
also go a kind of step further just because they're so good at animating everything and using those digital backgrounds and the that sort of those like light effects that the show's really, really good at. And it's set up in a way that like Western audiences, should they get through that barrier that August talked about, be sort of like oh, I can understand this. It's just like it's got lots of moments that are just like, yeah, this actually is a lot like Game of Thrones. Like I get what's going on here, and it's just so solidly put together. Its only real weaknesses, in my opinion, are in fact the things that tie it to Fate as a franchise, because that
Yeah,
ending of Fate Zero is incredibly odd and somewhat anticlimactic if you don't like know what comes next. Yeah, but like
and
you shouldn't know what comes next, because
yeah,
if you do know what comes next, you know her survives. But that takes away so much of the appeal of the show, and that's why it's so frustrating. But like
eh,
basically the point we're getting at here is that Studio Ufotable sort of came along after some other studios kind of tried to adapt these things, and for the most part, in my opinion, kind of failed, and just sort of wanted to inject this franchise with a little bit more new life, with a new team, new people, because after that they did an adaptation of Unlimited Blade Works, and that
and we should
is
explain what unlimited blade works is, because that also in turn clarifies what Heaven's Feel is.
yeah. So Fate Zero is a prequel to the first like 0.001. This is the first Fate thing that existed. Fate Stay Night, the visual novel. Zero takes place before that. Fate Stay Night is a little difficult to parse, but basically, the easiest way to describe it is its own story, but it has three separate paths you can go down. It has vanilla Fate Stay Night. It has Fate Stay Night Heaven's Feel, and Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works. And all of these characters, this is the Holy Grail War after the 1 and 0. So this is the fifth Holy Grail War. And everybody, it's like this, it's a new show with new characters. Some of them are related to the other ones in some way, but that all of the routes have the same characters in it, but more attention is paid to certain parts of the sort of narrative. So, in
And
a sense, it's a bit hard to get into just because of those three separate stories. But I think one of the advantages that Fate Stay Night has is that it has a lot going on in it and a lot of really good characters in it. And the three routes do manage to, at the end of the day, flesh out pretty much everybody in this story,
And if you want to be a
mostly.
little reductive about it, the three routes are different because it's which girl you get a bone.
Yeah, that's kind of the appeal. Fate Stay Night, Vanilla is the main character Shiro. It's him with Saber, which is I'll expound upon my feelings when we finally get to that, because I have
yeah,
some thoughts about the romance between the two of those
that's
characters.
its own thing, and
Uh,
that's Limited Blade Works, which is him and Rin,
Tsundere Archetype 001,
Tsundere Archetype 001.
Eva Mark One, Rin
Yeah,
Tosaka, and the third one is Heaven's Feel, which is Sakura. And so basically, these three stories are just three different ways that the fifth Holy Grail War can end. And the first adaptation was of Vanilla Fate Stay Night, which that's the only adaptation that really exists of it right now. Then they tried to do a movie of Unlimited Blade Works, the same studio that did that first one, and the movie sucks. You can
it's
find August Morgan and I talking about that movie on this very channel,
it's the whole. It's also an upload of the whole movie. So
which did not get copyright claimed for whatever reason. I think it's just because they give so little of a shit about that awful movie.
yeah,
It
so
was Morgan's formal introduction to the Fate franchise, and it was basically August and I explaining why this isn't terrible in its original form, like trying to defend ourselves from being like, look, 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 look.
look,
It's not perfect, but like there is a reason we like this, kind of.
yeah.
So what we're talking about today is the most recent entry in the Fate franchise proper with
Although
Ufotable.
that could change, because there could be a fucking Fate,
There
whatever the
there
hell.
are there are so many Fate shows. Like this is to give you an idea of what this is like. Imagine being a comic book fan when after Crisis on Infinite Earth happened for DC. Basically it becomes impossible to navigate the universe because there's so many different sides and spin-offs and their own stories. Like there is Carnival Phantasm, which is basically just a parody of Fate Stay Night, and then there's Khalid Liner Prisma Elia, which is a magical girl show that retcons one of the characters' deaths so that she
Mm,
becomes a magical girl in her own Sailor Moon show.
mm.
And there's like the games. There's so many fucking stories, but thankfully, Ufotable has just been adapting the core things. They did Fate Stay Night. They did Unlimited Blade Works. Or they did Fate Zero, they did Unlimited Blade Works, and then they decided to do Heaven's Feel, but not as a show, but as a trilogy of films. And that is what we are talking about today. We're
Yeah.
talking about one of the three routes of Fate Stay Night. And I think this is maybe this is like the ceiling for Fate right now, alongside with Zero for me, because I think the general tone of us watching these three movies is that we were like, yeah, we know they're made by Ufotable, so they're going to be quality directing wise, but
Like,
Heaven's Feel is very overtly the most explicitly porn route. Like that's just what people know it as. It's got a story in it, but it's just like, no, it exists to have Shiro bang Sakura. That's its existence. And so our expectations
if you
were
like the
kind of
purple
low.
hair, that's the route you take.
Yeah, exactly. It's, you pick your waifu. So, needless to say, we did not have high expectations going through this, as we have watched dozens upon
No.
dozens of hours of terrible Fate content, and we were just like, at least this will be good to look at. And we were right about that much. What we didn't expect was the fact that this trilogy of movies is broadly excellent. I would even
Yeah.
say, in many regards, it is quite outstanding. Its lowest points are better than most of the franchise, frankly, and its lowest
Uh,
points aren't like low points. They're just like less good
its
by
lowest
favor.
its lowest points are the same lowest point every singular story told over 3 films has, in that it's the middle where you have to tie together the beginning and the end.
Yeah. It's very bizarre, just because we were really into that first one, and like surprisingly so. And to set the stage here, Fate Stay Night in general focuses on the main character, Shiro Emiya. Emiya is Mr. Archetypical anime boy who does things well. He's quiet, he's timid, he's shy, he's at least they do this in a way that makes me read it this way, is that Shiro, and I don't say this to make fun of him, he's incredibly autistic coded. He's like
Yeah.
incredibly competent at his hyper specific niches and interests, and weirdly antisocial but still like amicable. Like, he knows how to talk to people, but he doesn't like get it. And I kind of like that about him, because he's one of the few anime protagonists that clearly falls under the category of being a cliche, but he's like the most effective form of his own cliche. So it revolves around him being someone who is aware of the existence of magic in the magical world because of his adopted father being a mage who is now dead. So he kind of knows about it a little bit. And then unwillingly, he somehow comes across a battle between two servants in the Fifth Holy Grail War, almost gets killed, then gets saved. And in some weird smorgasbord fucking happenstance of stuff happening, he gets involved in it and accidentally summons Saber from Fate Zero, Queen Arturia.
Essentially, what I think of this, what you're describing as, is and this is something we're saying here also for the sake of never having to talk about this again, because this is the spider biting Peter Parker, the Uncle Ben dying of this franchise.
Yes, this is what I had just said. This is true for all three routes. That doesn't change. But from this point onward, Shiro's allegiances, relationships, and just general occurrences will differ based on what route there is. In the route we're talking about today, Heaven's Feel, it primarily operates in lieu for Sakura. On Unlimited Blade Works, it's about Rin taking Shiro under her wing and explaining how the Holy Grail works. And one of the most interesting parts of these three movies is that it's sort of Shiro and Sakura developing a relationship, and neither one of them really knows that the other is involved in all of this at first, and from everything. He wants to sort of put this whole thing to bed. And one of the best things this does is that it develops Sakura and Shiro's relationship in a way that I don't even think the visual novel did an outstanding job at for its countless words. It's that, like, from the very beginning of this, it's really presented as a romance between the two of these
Yeah,
characters.
and
And you really get it.
yeah, and that's what's
Hmm.
so believable about it in a sense where like that first movie especially, when I think back on it, I tend not to think back on the combat and the action in it. I tend to think of like how much that film is focused on just the character building and showing the nuances of each individual person. Like, there's this really memorable moment for I think only Jake and I, because we're the only people who care about this kind of thing, where Shiro's like fiddling with magnets on a fridge, and you get so much about his character from that in a sense. You see a lot of the neurotic nervousness and how uncomfortable he is in that moment, and it's fantastic because you're getting that character building and character work in a really fascinating way that's not explicitly told to you, it's communicated to you visually.
It does a lot of that. And I think that goes to show you, like, it reminded me, at least its character work, of Garden of Sinners, which is a which is a film series that basically thrives on the fact that it just never explains what's going on. Ever. It's like there are hardly ever scenes of exposition. When there are, you don't even really know they're happening. You're just like, oh, this person's just talking to this other person. And I completely miss what the fucking semantics of their conversation were. But here, you sort of get this, like, really detailed, close look at these characters and why they are the way they are. And I found that so fucking refreshing because their Unlimited Blade Works show, I think, is quite good. I think it's just a little bit too long, and I think that for all of the character work that it does, that it's very strong. It's very plot heavy. It's very like story beat, story beat, story beat, story beat. It's just Rin kind of whisking Shiro from place to place. And this, despite only being 3 movies, is way more laid back and just kind of like lets the characters be at the front and center rather than having the conflict be at the front and center, which you wouldn't think would be a good approach for this series because they kind of thrive on doing an even balance of both. But much to my shock, I found this very compelling because you have Shiro, who, his main character, like, trait is that he is just like unflinchingly devoted and selfless to the people that he cares about, which is generic in a sense. But with Sakura, it gives him a great foil because her entire character dilemma is her basically being well, not from birth, but she was raised in a very abusive, hellish environment that we'll describe later. But it just sort of like convinces her that she's not worthy of attention or love and all of these things, and it gradually, the darkness kind of manifests inside her and turns her into this thing. And the limits of Shiro's devotion throughout the course of the trilogy is tested as she sinks further and further into this like abyssal darkness. And I love that shit.
And
It's front and center. It never loses sight of that. Even if it doesn't do it as well as it does the whole way through in like the second movie, I still think it does it very, very well.
and what I also and like that's also not to discount Sakura's arc, which I think we
Mhm.
would both say is also really good, where she's dealing with her self-worth, and when she does get that kill your abuser moment, it doesn't paint her as powerful, it paints her as helpless and like
Mhm.
still and just so broken at that point that she still finds herself so unable to advance and go on and like know what she's going to do, that she becomes the main villain, I guess main villain in quotes, almost
Main
out of
villain in the Hunter x Hunter sense of the
yeah,
term.
almost out of just necessity of her personality at that point. And I find that really interesting, and that yeah, and Hunter x Hunter sense is a great way of putting it because what she's doing is not necessarily actively evil. She's just trying to find herself, satisfy her own interests, but it has been so twisted and bent out of shape by the people who have brought her up that she just doesn't really know how to do that. And Shiro serves as kind of like a blanket or a pillow, as some way to help her deal with that. And that's kind of the arc across this whole thing, and it's just fantastic to watch.
It's also a perfect counter to what else but Future Diary that tries to do the exact same thing where Yuki is Shiro and Yuno is Sakura. And, it has that sort of moment where it's like, I love what they do with Sakura in this because her descent and then eventually the moment where she just snaps is super compelling because she's this very, very quiet, timid presence in the show. Like, if I had to describe it best of what it's all like, it's that Shiro, more Evangelion leak. This is how Evangelion leaks into every anime ever made. Shiro is Shinji, Rin is Asuka, and Sakura is Rei. And she has that very kind of emotional tenor, that sort of fragility, and how like she's useful to this one person and they've gaslit and lied to her and abused her and just are essentially using her for what she can do. And I don't know, I really like how close to the chest the movie just sort of like does away with all of the things that you would expect it to do and instead just becomes like, or it's also kind of what I wanted out of the Code Geass movie, where I was like, oh, it'd be cool if C2 and Lelouch just kind of like went on a road trip and it was like a lot of character shit. And that's kind of what these movies are. It's just
Yeah.
mostly Shiro and Sakura. It doesn't try to flesh out everyone involved in the Holy Grail War. Thank fucking God, because honestly, I don't care about them in this story.
And
I care about the central romance.
and that's a great thing that you pointed out, that these films know their priorities and who matters, because if someone doesn't matter, they either get killed or or it just relies on your knowledge of other Fate things to fill in the gaps, which I guess you could say is a bit of a barrier for entry, but what in this franchise isn't, so I'm not going to hold it
Yeah,
against it.
it's also just a very like Fate Unlimited Blade Works when the newer version. They managed Ufotable really managed to take both of these routes of the story and make it feel like it was supposed to be attached to Zero in the long run, because like Fate Zero, the core of it at least, of the main character, who the main character ends up being, and like what the whole story is it is basically the concept of heroism and the inherent clash between nihilism and naivety. And there's just sort of this clash between the two, and they'll never be resolved. And it kind of comes down on being like, at least in Zero, is that it kind of comes down on the side of nihilism, is that like everyone who gets what they want, they end up dying and they achieve peace, but the people who live on have to carry things with them. And Unlimited Blade Works kind of extends that theme through Shiro, and then Heaven's Feel also does, by it's just like you're going through all of the horrible things that they went through. I see it as kind of a continuation of what happened with Lancer in Fate Zero,
Mm.
where he's forced to harakiri himself out of like complete shame and has like the most horrible death that he could possibly imagine. Is that it's just like it's constantly building to a point where this could be what happens, but it's like just shy of it actually happening. Except when Sakura does finally snap, which I love that moment in the second movie at like the very end, where
Yeah, it's
Gilgamesh
the
just
ending
shows
of.
up.
Oh wait, no, it's not the ending. It's one of the ending scenes, though.
Yeah, Gilgamesh shows up, who is one of the he's basically one of the series antagonists, but he's from Fate Zero, and then he kind of shows up, and you're like, oh shit, it's Gilgamesh, this incredibly powerful, incredibly like formidable presence who will totally fuck you up if you let him. And Sakura bodies that bitch.
He
It's like The Last
owns
Jedi
his
when Kylo
ass.
Ren cuts Snoke in half. It's just like, oh, the real villain's the more interesting guy. Let's fucking go. And that's it's so fantastic. It's
She
also just like so violent and dark. Like even for this series, these fucking trilogies, man, they go hard on some of the incredibly bleak aspects of this world,
Yeah, and
especially as it pertains to Sakura.
and admittedly, with Gilgamesh, there arises like a minor problem. I think these movies have in general, but I'll use him as an example for it. Is that there are some moments where I do still wish there was a just a line of offhand dialogue where you maybe explained something extra, because Gilgamesh in this film is just a dude. He's just a human. And we had to look that up on the Type Moon wiki to understand what the hell was happening with his character or why he was there. Because it just
Yep.
the film gives you, if it doesn't need to give you something like for the main arc of the two characters, it will not give you that, and that can be a bit of a problem at times. I have where it just feels like we're glossing over something.
That's a great reason you picked that up because in some respect, every Ufotable Fate project has that problem. Fate
Yeah,
Zero definitely has that problem. Unlimited Blade Works absolutely has that problem. This definitely has that problem. And the reason it's because these guys are clearly way more adept at utilizing the parts, and like they're doing away with all the fat that they don't need, and they're focusing on the parts of it that are the most compelling, and so they're very focused on the story they're telling in the moment. When it comes to where the story takes place inside of this universe, which you inevitably have to pay attention to because of the amount of characters that all of these stories share, it gets a little tenuous because like one of the things that's always bugged me about fucking Fate is that you never know how much Shiro knows about anything. You never know if he knows how Kiritsugu died. We don't really understand if Kiritsugu ever explained to him anything about magic or the fact that he fought in the Holy Grail War. We don't know if Shiro is like what he knows in terms of like the greater universe or what happened in that time skip, or like what's
yeah.
what's Gilgamesh been doing this whole time, what's Kirei Kotomini been doing this whole time.
I,
You just don't know.
and yeah, and I think the thing is, there are some times when not having an answer is fine, but then there are times, and I think most prevalently in this, and this is more the case than not, there are times when you just want an answer because it would just take away a bit of mental stress of having to think about so much extra extraneous stuff which shouldn't really matter, but it ends up bogging you down because you are just forced to pay attention to so much.
And admittedly, the movies do the best job at condensing it into being information that's like if somebody like if we showed those movies to Morgan, we could probably get away with it because say Gilgamesh shows up, he'd be like, "Who the fuck is that guy?" And we'd be like, "Oh, he's the villain from Fate Zero, and he's just kind of here." And then he'd be like, "Okay, gotcha." So like
Yeah, no.
it balances on the tightrope as well as to be expected, and I don't blame Ufotable for not trying to like course correct and trying to tie all of this together
And
because in some respects it's
that's
kind of
important
pointless.
because
Yeah,
there are times smartly, I think, when they definitely do know some of the points on which to course correct. Like a big question we had was like, so Saber, does she like remember
remember.
anything? And we were like big on this, and it actually answers that. And it's and there's a couple moments like that where it's clearly conveying like, okay, you definitely have some sense of what questions the audience is going to be asking, and I think those moments are definitely commendable and do a
and
good job.
gratifying as a fan of parts of this franchise. Just having
Yeah.
these things explained to me very succinctly is just something that I frankly appreciate very much. And that first movie, I think, does a lot of it. Does a lot of the character stuff that I've wanted. It does a lot of the plot stuff that I wanted. And there is something that we have glossed over just a little bit, just because we've been emphasizing how strong the character work is. And that first movie, which I think we've been mostly primarily speaking on now, is
Yeah.
very good at sort of establishing the relationship and the world, and just basically giving you the emotional stakes for what's going on. But one thing we have not mentioned is, yeah, Ufotable, really high quality studio, high quality work. They put out a lot of good shit. This movie looks good. Yeah, it looks good, but it looks really good. Like, when the
Yeah.
action stuff does happen, and granted, I like the character stuff a little bit more because I am a character person, but my god, when the action does happen, holy shit!
It is face meltingly good. Like,
It's not even super plot relevant. Like, it's that first fight with Assassin and Lancer, I think, in the first movie is
that fight
just
is awesome.
like, it's not even super important, but you're watching it and you're just like, this is the coolest fucking, like, it becomes the fucking freeway fight from the Matrix Reloaded, and
Oh
it's
my
just like
god.
they keep like jumping around, like, it just
They
uses
jump
these
off of cars on
superhuman,
trains and shit, and
the locations keep changing, the lighting effects are fantastic, just the way it uses all of these parts are just like, it's the most impressively animated action I've seen since Akira. Like, I mean it
no,
wholeheartedly.
absolutely.
Nothing has come this close
And
before.
what's so good about that fight scene is the stakes are so well conveyed to you, and like the dynamic of what's happening in the fight is so well conveyed to you that you don't need dialogue to get it. Like you've got this moment where Lancer is clearly losing the fight, and you can
Mhm.
tell it's an uphill battle for him. But that's so obvious just through the visuals and how he's deflecting attacks, and you just get that. And that's something that a great director can do, where you just understand the fight without having your fucking Taya Gardner on the side explaining what card Yugi played.
It's, yeah, or having a thing of just like, oh, fucking, we're gonna have them fight, and it's all gonna be about stats, and Fate's really bad about that shit, and it's just nowhere to be seen here. And like, I want to emphasize, I bought this not because I like these
Mm.
movies, which I do, but I bought this purely because I wanted to see what it looked like on my HD TV. Because frankly, it's the most impressive looking anime movies that have been made since probably Garden of Sinners and Akira. And it's just so gratifying because like the fights and stuff like Fate Zero and Limited Blade Works are also like top caliber shit. But this is a whole new level. You can tell they were like, we have a budget. We know what we're going to do. This is going to be 2 hours long, and we're going to have like one or two fight scenes. We're going to go as hard as we can on these two fight scenes. And
It
my
makes me
God,
wonder.
they do.
It makes me wonder, like, what the Demon Slayer movie looks like, because that's another movie they've made recently, which we will
Yep.
cover at some point. Don't worry.
When we get a hold of it, don't you worry, y'all.
But that's something that has my curiosity so immensely piqued, and they're just so good at these fight scenes, and it's something where like a lesser director, this would just crumble under the weight of.
It would be the fucking Fate Apocrypha fights, where it was like all the animation is really flashy and fast moving, but it's directed like pure dog shit. So it's just like, I don't fucking know what's going on.
Yeah, people planned this. They knew what this was going to look like, and
They
it's
storyboarded it.
They storyboarded it. It's refreshing, just the level of care and detail to have put into this franchise.
The color design too is just absolutely immaculate. I don't think there is a studio right now short of who animated Hibike Euphonium?
Kyoto Animation.
Kyoto Annie. Kyoto Annie also has a similar level of quality with the incorporation of digital lighting. But I think Ufotable is the best in the business when it comes to that. They've mastered that since Garden of Sinners, and it's only got better here. Like nighttime in anime has never looked so colorful as it does in these movies. Like it's just you have these really stark, like the street lamps will be illuminating everything and it looks golden, and the sky will be this really dark shade of blue, and it's just like all of these really really striking combinations that just really do wonders for it.
And what strikes me also about those is like the way hair looks in the dark, and which is a weird thing to focus on, I'll admit, but I can distinctly remember just how like the tones of Sakura's hair color, like the
Mhm.
white and the purple, change throughout like various locations and how they look under different light, because there's
Mhm.
like that amount of detail put into this where it doesn't just feel like you put an opacity filter over the whole thing. It looks like you specifically crafted it to look this way, and it's breathtaking. And what we should say is, I know we've been saying a lot that this is good relative to Fate,
Mhm.
but we should also make the point that this is also just good.
Yeah, we
These
are
are also just
clearly
things that are
people.
great.
We are clearly people who come at this with a very broad understanding of what fate is. So it can seem like this inaccessible thing, but that was the thing that caught the both of us off guard. Is that it's just like this could feasibly be a way you could get your friend who likes anime into Fate just by showing them this. Like we said earlier, that you could feasibly do something like that with Morgan. It's just like you'd have to fill in some of the details for him, but this is something that's accessible on a level where this franchise really hasn't been since Gen Urobuchi came in, and you really have to applaud that, just because it's like it had been forever since I'd watched a Fate anything, so a lot of it was present in my mind. So I didn't remember a lot of the finer details of the universe, but the finer details of the universe don't matter here. It's just about setting up that relationship with Sakura and Shiro, and I think it does it really well. We have some minor like pacing issues and like tiny itty bitty structural things about the first movie that hold it back from being like a masterpiece, but it's damn close. The first movie is like an insanely strong start. And the
Yeah,
second movie is the low point of the three movies, and that said, it's
we
really
still
damn
both
good.
really like it. Yeah.
It's also, I just need to say, I didn't notice this before just because I didn't read it, but allow me to read the plot description
Oh,
on the back of
this
this,
is gonna be amazing.
because I took a look at the quote they put at the top of this, and I was like, oh no, somebody just put these words into Google Translate and just printed whatever
Yes.
came out on the back. First, the giant quote on the back of Presage Flower says, "If I became a bad person, would you be mad at me?" Wow, that's a really striking quote. Gets my attention. Um, the boy wished to protect the girl. That was his thought. 10 years after the Holy Grail War, a battle waged by masters and servants over the wish granting container, the Holy Grail, another war breaks out in Fuyuki City. Shiro, the adopted son of Kiritsugu Emiya, a participant in the previous Holy Grail War, resolves to fight, carrying out Kiritsugu's dying wish. That is not talked about
No,
in film.
that's not mentioned. Sorry.
There's a young girl by Shiro's side who's in love with him. Sakuramoto, they just say it. Every morning she goes to Shiro's house to make breakfast and dinner for him. Bringing kindness, that's not grammatically correct. Bringing kindness into the life of a boy utterly alone in the world. But once the Holy Grail War starts, there's a change in the air in Fuyuki City. Murders abound across the city. The atmosphere grows ominous. Shiro decides to shelter Sakura in his
Oh
house.
no.
I
Oh
mean, it's not
no.
inaccurate, but
It's not wrong, but that's also not the way a human would convey that.
no, but it does sort of hint at the fact that like the best parts of the first movie are when it does kind of the slice of life relationship stuff, and it's like that stuff's really strong, and that's kind of why the second one is the weakest, is because you get the least amount of character stuff. And I know that it's like, well, you're complaining about there being more flashy action scenes in these movies that you just said were the best you've ever seen. Get a grip, loser. And it's like, yeah.
Yeah,
But
fine. Fuck you.
the character stuff is really, really good, and I still feel like they could have done a better job at incorporating more of it into the second part, because the second part is the most plot heavy. The
And
second part is where it's explaining all of the machinations of what's going on. You get all of these, like, the new characters showing up. Zoken Mato shows up as sort of the series, like, or the overarching villain for that sort of first 2/3 of it, and you get more stuff with Sakura, but at the expense of having time where Shiro and Sakura are spent too far away, and it kind of removes one of those really vital strengths that the first movie had.
and if I may say, I do think there is, and this is also going a bit into the third movie now. Uh,
Mm.
Third movie, which is basically all just one big fight, essentially.
Hmm.
What's compel where that works, and I think this doesn't work as strongly, is the emotions of the fight are so intertwined in the DNA of the battle in that third film, where you really every punch, every blow is its own emotional beat. Where here, sometimes it's lacking that, and it can feel like fighting for fighting's sake, which
Yeah,
is
you know there's not going to be any, like, actual resolve or, like, further conflict or an elaboration thereof once the fight ends. Like, you more or less know what it will or will not yield.
yeah, yeah.
And but the through line of quality is maintained. Like, this isn't like a drop in quality or anything. It's just like it's the part of the narrative that is the least well, I guess not the least, it's actually the most utilitarian. It's just almost debatably too utilitarian, because it's just making you aware of all of these parts and it's moving together. But it's necessary connective tissue, if nothing else. It's getting you through all of, like, and it does it very briskly, it does it very well. But it is nonetheless sort of a bridge to get from the first movie to the third one. And the combination there is where this truly shines, is that August kind of alluded to the third movie being, like, basically set piece, set piece, set piece, set piece. And yeah, I won't front. I don't think the third movie is, like, better than the first one from, like, a pure storytelling perspective. But my god, as a Fate fan, I've never been happier with anything I've ever watched. Like,
Yeah.
to be, like, just totally honest, this movie gets half its points for me by being insanely hype. Like, I like the fight scenes were good before, but this is some, like before it blew your mind apart. This is some brain matter expanding shit, dude.
It's insane. It's
Like,
it's so good we weren't laughing at them saying, "I am the bone of my sword." We were like,
yeah, we were
"Fuck
just
yeah!
like, yes, on the bone of my sword.
Yeah!
Fucking
Yeah,
the
baby!"
last time I was this hyped over a coalescence of a fight scene and, like, drama, which that is why the movie is really good, is that it always defines the emotional stakes of the battle and the physical stakes of the battle. It's
And
never
that's
just
what
spectacle for
I care
spectacle's
about.
sake. Yeah, it builds off of, it's just like, it takes advantage of everything that two used to get you there, and it takes advantage of the context of knowing the connection that Sakura and Shiro had in that first movie, and that makes all of this, like, nail biting and incredible to watch. The fucking score, absolutely, like, Yuki Kajira once again calling the shot, Babe Ruth hitting it out of the fucking ballpark. This shit is just an aesthetic marvel, and the way it mirrors the drama and the way it uses composition is nigh unparalleled. Like, from a visual standpoint, this is probably the best one, because it's able to convey all of these thoughts and feelings and emotions without even using dialogue, and it does so in such a resplendent way, and it's just so kinetic and exciting. The last time I was this excited by all of it was when I watched the hypest, bestest fight in all of anime, which is Wrath versus Scar in Full Metal Alchemist
Yes.
Brotherhood, which I think I watched that clip like once a month, just because it, like, the end where he grabs the blade with his teeth and shoves it into Scar is the hardest shit I think I've ever seen in my life. Like, that was the last time I remember getting this excited about something. Like, it manages to tie together so many of the themes of Shiro and, like, Shiro and Shiro's existence in like other arcs, like it manages to do a lot of what Unlimited Blade Works did as well. And the resolution with Sakura and like all of that, and like the conflict between Sakura and Rin is also very, very well put. Like it just basically ties a neat little bow around all of these things that previously just never really connected for me. Like there's always this like a branch of one of these stories where it leaves questions unanswered, where it leaves character arcs unfulfilled. Whereas in this version of the story, it's like it leaves no stone unturned, and it does it in the smartest, most interesting, and most beautiful visually way possible, to the point where I was just like, you know what, maybe watching Fate Apocrypha and fucking Fate whatever the fuck, maybe it was worth it. Because
maybe,
this felt like I felt like I was 14 and saw Fate Zero again. It was like when I got to the end of that show and I was just like, oh my god, this is changing the way I think about everything. And I was just like, this is it. This is the pinnacle.
It feels so definitive in a sense, where it's like, this was the last Fate thing ever made. I could be satisfied that this was the ending, because the emotional arc it doesn't only complete Shiro's arc, as we alluded to, it also completes Kyrie's arc. Not Kyrie.
Which, oh god, that was so fucking amazing. Like,
awesome.
Like, basically, it's structured almost like a video game. Is that it's just like Shiro's got to like face down all of these opponents. He's got to go through this fucking gauntlet of basically everything. And like Rin shows up too, and they do this thing with her and Sakura that's just really, 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 really sweet and touching. Which I have always hated about these Fate stories, is that it never ever plays on the dynamic between Sakura and Rin, which I think is innately one of the most interesting character conflicts in this entire show, where it's, you know, you have these two estranged sisters, and one of them has basically had to pretend that the other doesn't exist for most of her life, and the other one has been in this home where she has been abused and exploited and raped and all of these things. And it's like you just sort of have this conflict of Rin feeling immeasurable amounts of guilt that happened to her, but not being able to change it, and Sakura being like, I wanted to keep you away from all of this, but at the same time, why didn't you save me? So it's so good.
And it does it in a way, counter once again to Future Diary, in a way that feels, I guess for lack of a better word, tasteful. Where I don't feel like what we're being shown is meant to be exploitative.
No. Ironic that it comes from the porn-centric route.
Yeah.
Which, that is to say, this does have nudity, but I want to say two things on the overt displays of sexuality in this show. First of all, the part where Shinji, just like when he's having his fucking mad tirade in the second movie, and he's like, yeah, did you tell him about how I fucked you? And we were both like, whoa, can he say that? we fucking flipped out, and I was just like, holy shit. And that made him getting his just desserts. Oh, that made that
made that part both wonderful and horrifying, because you know now Sakura's taken another step into the abyss.
Oh yeah, and the other display I think is like genuinely great. It's Shiro and Sakura when they finally hook up and have sex in the second movie. Is that there's no bones about it. It doesn't try to do it with like visual metaphors. Unlimited Blade Works movie with dolphins.
Don't need a fucking dolphin or a
dolphin sex scene. Or there's Shiro, a thing that happens.
Shiro skydiving into a dragon,
getting his arm ripped off,
which also happens.
But yeah, it's like they have sex, and I can't emphasize enough how refreshing it is to see an actual healthy sexual relationship between two characters in an anime. Like, as someone who has lived with this medium for more than a decade, this simply does not happen. It is always played for something else. It is always like done in an immature way, or not at all, or a will they won't they thing. And it's always sanitized and inhuman, and you just never get along with it. It never feels like it's organic or whatever, but it's just like they're solidifying this connection that they've built up, and them, you know, doing it. And it's like, you know, Shiro's not like, "Wah, boobs," and she's not like, "Oh no, you're seeing me naked." Like, it's genuinely a very sweet, very tender moment between these two characters that you can like appreciate as a moment.
And it also doesn't devolve into just being a porn scene where it's
No, it's pretty
strictly
tasteful.
there. It's not, yeah, just strictly there for
It's more tasteful in the game.
eroticism. Yeah, but it just happens, and you're like, okay, I get it. They
Yeah,
have
it's
sex. Cool.
I like again, we've lived through the great asterisk war debacle, which I think is the worst example of that, where it's just like you have this fucking lead character who's surrounded by hot women, and he's just like, oh no, gotta wash my eyes out with hand sanitizer every time I see a gorgeous woman with
Ugh.
boobs. And it's just like I don't relate to any of these fucking teenage boys in these shows. It's like this is why people like shows like Code Geass, because Lelouch never has a moment where he's just like, "Oh my god, breasts!" It's just like I
But I
fucking.
mean,
But he's also a sexless husk of a character.
yeah,
So
and not like a light Yagami sexless husk where it's like, oh my god, that's just how this person would be because he's so self-centered and fucked up. It's like
that end, if Light Yagami had to fuck someone to emotionally manipulate them, he totally
he
would.
totally would.
It's just like I just buy it. Like if it's just like if he got Misa to do what he wanted and that was what it took, he'd do it no
He'd
question.
do it. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just like I
exactly.
just believe that about him. That's good writing.
Like
But yeah,
that's and I mean, yeah, that's once again for another day. But
yeah.
that,
The Shiro that is in the original Fate Stay Night anime and the Shiro of the Ufotable incarnations of him, basically two different people. Like he's a real flesh and blood person in these movies, which I think is the most relieving thing about it. It's one of those Fate things too where like the ending is wholly satisfying. It leaves nothing up to for debate in the air. It closes every door. You just finish it and you're like, wow, I went on a journey. I had a good time. Everything was well put together. My mind was blown a couple times. I had moments where I was
yeah,
genuinely choked up and emotional, and then it just ended. And I
and
didn't have to worry about checking a wiki.
and it's like, thank God I don't have to watch anything after this. I don't need to check the wiki. That was it. It was nice. I'm satisfied.
And for as much as we're like heaping praise onto this trilogy of movies, it's so telling that it's the route that has the least to do with the Holy Grail War. Because the conflict in like the macro sense of this story is solely based on Sakura. Like the Holy Grail and the war and the servant, they don't matter. They're just like window dressing. Like
Oh
Saber,
yeah,
barely in this. Lancer, barely in this. Assassin, kind of in this. Like they're just not really
Assassin's in it
here.
by virtue of being a Bugman's servant, and that's why
Yep.
he's in it.
He's got that cool fight. That's his purpose. Cool, dope, love it. And
Berserker
it just
is in it for like a scene,
yeah, Berserker and Ilya are in it. I mean, like it's not her story, so I
and
can't be mad about it. But and Ilya's my favorite character in Fate. But like you have to make like a movie that's like just about her to make her story even worth telling.
her
So I'm kind of
inclusion,
glad.
yeah, not terribly interesting, unfortunately.
Mm. Yeah, it's you know there are definitely some caveats made here, but it ultimately is the right decisions are being made. Like I think the reason that I loved this trilogy so much for some of its shortcomings is that the reason I think it's one of the better trilogies to come out in recent memory. Honestly, I think I'd say it's probably the best one since Lord of the Rings if I'm really thinking about it.
I mean, I would say it's better than Lord of the Rings, but
Oh, I mean, I can't even like fault you just because of how like consistent quality wise it is. I mean, it's absolutely up there for me. But like the reason that I like it so much is that it takes these characters in this universe and it tells a story the way I would tell it. Like if you handed me Heaven's Feel and were just like make this into a trilogy of movies, it would basically look exactly the same. A couple things changed. I'd probably try to fill out part 2 a bit more, but
yeah,
it's just yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's it's what we wanted, and it's the most satisfying thing to come out of this franchise in a
So far,
decade,
yes, it's
I'd
it's
say.
easily the best thing since Fate Zero, and I would say it's basically as good as Fate Zero. I'd say the only real like leg up that Zero has is that it's got a better like a wider, broader construction around it. But the only thing that puts that like evens the playing field is the fact that one has a really great ending and one has an ending that it fucks with like your perception of the whole franchise, which is like Fate Zero's ending is great. It's just that you have to understand a lot about what goes on in this universe to understand why it's great.
Yeah,
But it's so refreshing to talk about these after we talked about the previous two trilogies that we covered, where it was just nothing but consistent disappointment and just nothing but shitting on things that we loved. And then this thing that we didn't even expect to be good came and literally blew our minds.
Ugh, it it was just nice.
It was, and that is the first thing we are going to do talking about Fate. I think the way we'll do this is we'll sort of journey through the things that are going to be easiest to make it through, i.e., the best things. We're probably going to do. I'd say after this, it's best that we do Unlimited Blade Works, just because it's another Fate Stay Night route, and we should flesh those out while we can. And
Yeah,
then, and you've seen Fate Zero semi recently, so we can put that
yeah.
off a little bit longer. But we can do that, and then we can do spin-off shows. But it's just like we're basically going to tackle it in chunks of like what the full branches of each story even are.
What's important to what? How does it relate to whatever
Yes.
else we've talked about? And yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's about all we have for you. This is great. Watch it if you haven't. I mean, it's not a half bad entryway, if we're being
Yeah,
frank.
I'd say if the best place to start is Zero. This is the second best place to start. But if you're getting into this franchise, start with Zero, go to this, and if you like both of these, hit up Unlimited Blade Works, and then never touch this franchise ever again. Ever.
Yeah.
Don't even contemplate it. Just leave it alone, pretend nothing else exists. And unless you want to watch our podcast, because we'll inevitably lose our minds at least on 4 separate occasions with some of these fucking shows.
Two of which we've already covered now. Well, in part.
We will talk about all of them, unfortunately.
But yeah, thank
But
you
yeah,
for watching.
quality. Sometimes things are good.
Sometimes we're not on negative. Goodbye.
Bye.